Hi, I'm Michelle Chalfant, psychotherapist, holistic life coach, and human just like you, learning to navigate life's challenges. With over 25 years experience, I teach people how to get healthy using the adult chair model. The adult chair model is where simple psychology meets grounded spirituality, and it teaches us how to become healthy adults. From anxiety and depression to codependency and relationship issues, you can use the adult chair for just about anything. Each week, I share practical tips, tools, and advice from myself and a wide range of experts on how to get unstuck, how to live authentically, and how to truly love yourself, all while sitting in your adult chair. Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair. It is Michelle Chalfant again with you today, and I am thrilled about our guest. So many of you have hit us up and asked me to have our special guest on today, Dr. Nicole LePera. She is the holistic psychologist on Instagram. And I've gotten tagged and we've gotten emails in. Please have her on. Please have her on. She's so much like you. And I'm like, I know. I follow her too. She is a sister. How does that go, Nicole? She's a sister from another mother, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Something like that.
Something like that. I'm like, yeah, I feel like everything I read, I'm like, I'm in line with that. I say the same thing. I love this girl. So I'm so happy to have you on today. So you guys, today we're going to be talking all about healing, transformation, and we're going to do it from a little bit of a different lens. We're going to do it from a holistic lens, which is what I love and obviously what Nicole loves. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump right in. Dr. Nicole LePera is a holistic psychologist who believes that mental wellness is for everyone. She evolved her more traditional training from Cornell to the new school to one that acknowledges the connection between the mind and body. Dr. LePera views mental and physical struggles from a whole person perspective and works to identify the underlying physical and emotional causes. She understands that balance is an integral part of wellness and empowers individuals to heal themselves, supporting them on their wellness journeys. Welcome, Dr. Nicole LePera. So happy to have you on.
So happy to be here, Michelle. And community, thank you for finally arranging what does feel like it was inevitable. We very much are in alignment, speaking the same language. I'm super excited to dive into this with you.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. Gosh, I have, like I said, I have talking points. I don't think we're going to need them because I think this is just going to flow. But I want to hit you up on this. I want to ask you a question about this. I'm a therapist. You are a psychologist. I'm going to dive right in, Nicole. What is your take on traditional therapy? Is it archaic and in need of an update or an upgrade, I should say?
Yeah, I think in many ways. And I came by that very emphatic affirmative through my own, kind of journey in the system as a client, and also through having the private practice. I no longer do one-on-one work, but I did for several years. And as I'm sure you know, you start to see clients week after week for several years. And what I started to see, Michelle, is a lot of patterns with an overarching word, whether or not we were speaking the word or feeling the word, and that word is stuck. Yeah. And I started to really, and I was saying this from a personal perspective as well. As long as I can remember, I was a human who experienced anxiety. I was a little girl, afraid of the world, hiding under tables. So of course, for a very long time, I thought that was my lot in life. I thought, okay, I'm an anxious being. I saw it in my mom, the same patterning. Yeah. So I thought my options were limited, and I did those options. I was on medication for several years. I was in talk therapy. I even went and did some analytic training, and I laid on a couch multiple times a week. So I tried all of the things, and what I kept realizing is I was stuck. So then, accumulating client hours week after week, I started to see the same patterning. So I say that to say, and the reason why I work holistically now, and I really talk about, I put a third entity in there. So we have the mind, we have the body, and I believe we have a spirit. There's another entity that makes us the human that we are, and marrying all of those three concepts in a holistic way. And so I say that to say, I think historically, many of the models, many of the ways that we were trained weren't as integrative. and
Mhm.
they need to be. And that was a big contributor to why we're stuck. So I'm hoping that listeners aren't hearing me say, throw out the old model, talk therapy. That's not what I mean. I actually think there's a place for it. I think
Mhm.
people can gain incredible support from those relationships. I now know, however, that it's not enough, that there's
Mhm.
things that we need to integrate into our day-to-day living
Mhm.
to actually create and maintain the changes, or else we kind of slide back into what you hear me call autopilot. And
Mhm.
that's that kind of repetitive Groundhog's Day. I mean, if you hear like all the conditioning that we're just reliving and
Oh
reliving and
yeah.
reliving, repeating our past. So
Yep.
I say all that to say it's not enough. It's part of the story for many of us. We need
Mhm.
to marry the whole being in a little more, or understand the whole being in a bit more of an integrative way.
Mhm.
And I believe we need to expand the tools that we're practicing outside of therapy as well.
Yeah, 100% on the same page. Surprise. Yeah, I also believe in that spirit part, and I also even include energy and energy medicine into
Yes.
what I do as well. I mean, we have to. You can't just do one part. You can't.
No.
So I'm glad that we're on the same page. I wasn't sure about that, but I do too. And again, no slamming on therapists. You know, I agree. I'm with you all the way. Like there's definitely a place, but we've got to add more things into quote unquote traditional therapy. There's a miss there. So, and I think that that's where our world is going. Thank goodness. You talked about the tools outside of therapy. Talk about some of the tools that you really like to use and that you might have used even for yourself.
Yeah, so being I already brought up what I go on and on about, the autopilot,
Yes.
the foundational tool, as
Yep.
far as I see it, in my own healing journey and many others, is breaking that conditioned pattern for many of
Yeah.
us, of living from that, kind of autopilot, that outside of my awareness. The fact really is for most of us that we are very patterned, meaning we
Yep.
do the same things in our behaviors day in and day out. We have the same thing we do first thing when we wake up, same thing we do, right? Don't believe me, watch yourself, observe. We're very patterned.
Yep.
We're also really patterned in the way we
Yep.
think. We tell ourselves the same stories about ourselves, our relationships, the world, the past, the future. Really, we like to tell ourselves very patterned stories.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us tend to recycle the same feelings. For me, my resting state was somewhere between not anxious and anxious. And
Mm.
that's all I knew. There was no real sadness, no real anger, no real joy either.
Yeah.
So again, we become very patterned. And why do I bring this up? When we're not paying attention, that autopilot, I know the percentages that maybe listeners have heard, upwards around 90% say of our day,
Mm. Yeah.
we are allowing that autopilot to make those choices, which is why life appears very Groundhog's Day, because we're making the same ones.
Mm-hmm.
So to create change, I believe that creating a new habit of consciousness, of being present, of being aware of what's actually here in the moment, and that then creates the opportunity to begin to make new choices,
Mm-hmm.
to create new maybe behavioral habits that'll better serve the future that you want to see, or to create new ways of think, right? New patterns of
Mm-hmm.
thoughts that can then translate to new ways that we feel. Of course, there's a big overarching component in there that I think we need to speak about, which is the role our nervous system plays in
Yes.
regulation and making
Yeah.
sure that we are in a balanced, regulated body, because all
Mm-hmm.
of these things that I'm talking about and this level of consciousness only go so far as our ability to really integrate the body, to
Yeah.
regulate the body. So it comes first and foremost with breaking out of that habit, with
Mm-hmm.
first the two steps being notice how much time you spend not conscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? How much time are you just kind of going through the motions of life? Once you observe yourself or experience yourself in that way, you're probably going to notice a lot, is the answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we really want to practice a habit of creating consciousness. And the quickest and simplest way that we can do that is through our senses, right? Is grounding ourselves in the present moment by just doing a sense-based check-in. Okay, what am I feeling in this moment? So for me, I could be leaning and I feel like the tactile, right, of my back against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's an aroma in my room. I can smell, I can see, I can focus my attention
Mm-hmm.
on that. When I'm doing that, I now, if I was in that unconscious state, I can come back into consciousness. And you asked me, kind of if I use this tool, I will say I had to spend a lot of time building this new habit, because I was what we call, and I'm sure you've dissociated. I was not conscious. I was so disconnected from my body that this practice that I'm talking about for me lasted well into months of trying to just learn how to be present before I then created other changes in my life. So when I say it's foundational, I mean it's really foundational, and it becomes the tool by which we create change.
If I can give an example, because this is an example I use about talking about consciousness and becoming an observer, because I still think people go, well, what do you mean? Like I'm in my body. Like, what are you talking about? And I think like, and I agree with you. It's that default mode network that we get up. It's Groundhog Day every single day. Every single day, it's the same thing. But what I started doing was, here is what I noticed when I was conscious. To give everyone an example, instead of getting up in the morning, going to the bathroom, walking, letting the dogs out, going to feed the dogs, getting in the shower, like, yes, like we're awake, but there's a consciousness that you can be awake and still not be fully in the body and be conscious about what you're doing, because we're in that robotic mode of just, okay, here we do it again, the Groundhog Day, like you said. But what I noticed, I remember thinking, this was the thing that jumped out at me, like, okay, I'm gonna let the dogs out. And then I go out typically and I stand in bare feet on the front yard, and I touch a tree, and I'm feeling the grass under my feet. I'm like, oh, I never really paid attention to the coolness of the grass in the morning. And oh, the tree feels so rough on my hand. So I was like taking in every single moment of my morning. And then I remember putting the dog kibbles in the little bowl, the tin bowls, like tick, 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 tick. I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard those before, because it's just like everything felt so loud, not in a bad way. I was like, it's so loud and it's rich. And what I was hearing and seeing, and the grass in the morning was so green. And when my dogs were licking me because they were so excited, I'm like, I really feel that. So it's like we're in the body experiencing. It's not that we're not doing the same thing. It's the experience of what we're doing is rich. It's a very different experience being in the body. And I know all about being disassociated too, Nicole. So
Yeah. And that's the thing, Michelle, we can get very savvy. No one would have known that I was so disconnected. I mean, I was having conversations with people. I was
yeah,
so appearingly there that it is confusing. And so what part of my dissociated experience that I talk about often, because for a while, I'm happy you brought up the kind of like, I'm actually experiencing life aspect of it.
yeah,
Because something I knew this for quite some time, and I knew that I was different in this way for quite some time. I had no memories. I don't have the childhood, like, oh, this is what holidays look like. And I would notice, because when I would talk about the past, I would actually use language that actually was some version of, I have the idea that, and it was never like concrete, like Christmas looked like this, right?
yeah,
So I started to realize I don't have many of those memories. So I spent a long period of time convinced that there was something cognitively wrong in my brain where the memories are stored. I then came to realize that's why. If you're not present for life as it's happening, there is no real memory there to retrieve later. And I share that because I talk often about my lack of memories, and I am overwhelmed at the universal resonance that this has. I actually just did a post this week, and it was shocking how essentially quote unquote viral it went, because there's a lot of humans around the world that have lived so dissociated that they too probably appear to be living life, and now they're wondering where life went. They have no memories of it. So I like to explain that that's a big reason why. Yes, there's the nervous system shutdown aspect of it, but just from a very simple, logical, if I'm not here taking in the grass, there's no memory then that I can revisit at a later time.
Yeah, great point. And I teach adult chair 3-day intensives, and I just finished one just last week. And a couple people asked me, like, I don't have memories from childhood. There's nothing there. What do you say to that? I mean, I totally get that if we don't have the emotional experience, if we're not in the body, you can't have it. And if there's no big emotional experience, then you're not going to have it. But is there any other reason why we wouldn't have? And can you then retrieve at some point childhood? Do you have recall of your childhood at some point?
My response to that, I'll just give my direct response to that is, you're a living memory. You're living the
Yeah.
memory.
Oh,
So
I
whether
like
or not you
that.
have the movie screen of what happened, watch yourself. You'll see what like the remnants and how you coped with what happened. And again, those daily habits, those daily stories you're telling yourself, those daily emotions. So I get a lot of that version of the question with the concern, well, if I don't have the memory, how do I go back and write it or fix it? And my statement is always the same. You don't have to. You're living it. You're living that conditioned patterns, all the things that you've dealt, you've coped, and now you can create change. So that I think is my major response to any questions, and whether or not they can be retrieved. I think that's some people might get, some might not, because the question is it there? Right?
Yeah.
Is there a memory somewhere? I keep going in my brain, like somewhere that I can access? And if the answer is no, it was never encoded, to use like the word, right? It was never put in.
Yeah.
Then I don't know if that ever gets retrieved. Typically, though, when that question's asked, it's usually with the concern of, well, will I be able to heal? So that second, or my first response is, yeah, you're going to be able to heal because you're going to see your pattern in real time.
I love that. You're living your memories. It's so true, because our triggers are showing up, how we are reacting is showing up. Like, it's all because that's all from early childhood stuff. So I love that. I like how you said that. Talk a little bit more about, I love talking about the nervous system. What do you think about in this day and age, what's happening to our nervous systems? Like, do you feel like there's more anxiety now than ever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most of us are locked. When I talk about the nervous system, the first example I very readily give is an overactivated sympathetic, locked in fight or flight. That's essentially what I live. And I say it so readily because I believe it's so common. And it's such an integral part of why we're stuck, that word I was using earlier, because no amount of logic or consciousness is going to override that deepest nervous system regulation. That we have a sixth sense. Listeners might have heard of that. The hair goes up. That's real. We actually, our nervous system does that. It has senses, and it's sensing the environment around us outside of our awareness at all times, with its main intention is to keep us safe. And I really like to clarify what that means to the nervous system. Safe, familiar, that's all it means. Because it's not logical. The safe things that we're quote unquote doing in that nervous system overdrive, for many of us, aren't actually safe. Some of that, they need self-medicating, some of it might be explosive behaviors, right? Doesn't mean that they're logically safe. To the nervous system, it means it's predictable, it's familiar. It played that tape out, because uncertainty, the unpredictable to the nervous system, could be threatening, could be actually, cause us harm. So I just like to clarify that, because I know a lot of us are seeing ourselves stuck in not intuitively safe experiences time and time again. So it's the pull to just being familiar or being in the familiar. And I know a lot of us are in that hyperactive sympathetic state. I also know a lot of us get stuck in the hyperactive parasympathetic state. That looks like the depression, the low energy, that I just can't summon myself to get out of bed. And that's very real. That's the nervous system in that shutdown mode. To clarify, the nervous system in the overactive sympathetic mode is what I felt like, always on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Everything was the shoe that dropped, including the mail that was delayed, that threw me, right? I'm hyper vigilant, I'm tense maybe. So the short answer is, I believe that we don't have a flexible nervous system. Most of us by this age, some of it is societally. Some of it is the cities in which we're living. Some of it is, some of us are living in war-torn countries. Some of us are living under systematic racism. I mean, the threats really abound in this day and age. So for external reasons, for internal reasons, I believe a lot of us are dysregulated at the nervous system level, which is causing us that stuck.
Yeah, I like that you brought up, because this is what I'm hearing about too, with the polyvagal theory and all of these things about the nervous system. That is it anxiety first that triggers the nervous system, or is the nervous system triggering us into anxiety? And likewise with depression, are we in dorsal shutdown, or are we in dorsal shutdown, or is it depression? Like, what comes first? So comment on that, but also share with us, if you could, so what are some of the tools that you suggest to help get us out of anxiety or depression?
Yeah. So, I mean, the chicken or the egg, what comes first, is complicated. So let's talk a little more about the nervous system. We, as an infant, we are in a complete state of dependency. However it is you believe infant humans get upon, right, Earth, we're here. And
Yeah.
we have needs, right? We have physical, we have emotional, we have, as far as I see it, spiritual needs. However, we cannot meet them on our own, quite literally, right? We're the one mammal that needs a caregiver of some sort, lest we will not continue to live. We need to be fed. One of the needs that we have is we cannot regulate our nervous system. Short and simple, when children cry, they're dysregulated. Think about it, right? Mom goes over, if she's attuned, she shushes down, back into calm. Why do I bring that up? Because we were all carried by mothers that had a nervous system. I mean, this might sound silly, right? So we have to think back to, or ask ourselves, from what you know of your caregiver, or your parent, or your mother in particular, how regulated was my mother? Because my mother, and or whatever caregiver is present once you're out of mom's belly, and maybe it's not mom, right? That human is still going to be helping you, what we call co-regulate your nervous system. So why do I bring that up? For me, the chicken or the egg is really complicated, because what I know of my mother, she was completely dysregulated. She too was in a state of dissociation, meaning her nervous system was in that fight or flight and or that shutdown mode at any given time, not flexible, not able to deal with the stress and come back down to baseline. So when I was in her belly, right, when I was in her uterus, I mean, just think about it, I was being regulated by a dysregulated nervous system. So how do we know, right? So
so your whole the whole baseline is off from the beginning.
There was never a baseline of balance. And now I'm out, and for my caregiving, it was my mom who was, you know, the one that was caring for me during the daytime at least. So now, right now, I'm an infant outside of mom, and now when I'm dysregulated, that's still the nervous system that I'm trying to regulate with. Which means, again, I was struggling out of, you know, as far as I say it, Michelle, I have been in balance, like I said, from the second I was an embryo, you know, in life. So that's a hard question. And I think a lot of us have a similar experience. And that's why I talk a lot about intergenerational and understanding, right, the patterns that were lived before us, because they do impact us, and they are imprinted, right, in our development, in our nervous system. So how do we begin to heal? First and foremost, you identify, you know, that you are experiencing symptoms of an overactive nervous system in either of those directions. I talk a lot about, I like to give tools, let me back up a minute, that are practical, that don't feel like I have to have a production and I have to have a little time, you know, space away from the world. I love translating ways that we can just begin to create these new habits in our real life, in daily life. So I talk a lot about breath work, because there's a particular way that we can harness an intentional practice of breath work, even as we're going about our day-to-day. The quickest, easiest one that I'm always going on and on about is just retraining our body to breathe from a deeper place, from deep in our belly, as opposed to the shallow chest-based breath that carries us through our day. And I say that one because that's how I began to practice. First and foremost, it was hard for me to breathe into my belly, because I had a lot of curvature of my spine. I had a lot of the results of being so tense my whole life. So I practiced actually when I would lay in bed, until I got to be able to practice a deep belly breath sitting up. And then I practiced all day long. I mean, you could be sitting having a session with me, and every now and again I might just direct my breath down my belly, right? And so now I'm learning a new way, and that can go a long way of regulating your nervous system. So breath work is something I'm always talking about.
I love breath. That, and funny, you mentioned that the belly breath is your go-to. That was one of my favorite ones. I found, and I want to ask your opinion on this. For me, when I learned that, it took me about 2 weeks or so to get my body to go, it's a natural breath now from the belly. Is that what you're finding too? Same kind of, like about a couple weeks or so.
Probably longer than that for me, because for a while it was really hard for me posturally to do that. And then once I did, it wasn't natural. And I'm now to the place where I breathe typically from my belly. However, now I can catch myself.
Yes.
And I do two things. When I'm feeling stressed, I stop breathing. I like hold my breath. And then right? So that's the thing. Like, even now I have a new habit. I breathe from my belly. I can still sense when my body's going into that hyperactive nervous system again. And for me, my marker is, I'm like holding my breath. And then I'll make a conscious effort to, breathing from the belly.
Yeah. I remember walking around with my hand on my belly for like a couple of
Yeah.
weeks, like driving the car, like you said, like with a session, I'd have my client, my hand on my belly. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But I agree. I go high chest. I hold my breath as well. I would guess we all do, like when we get scared like that, like that's just something we do. Um, what about other techniques? What are some other techniques that you love? Like if someone comes into you with depression, what would you recommend that what's a starting point for them?
So I talk a lot, just backing up a little bit, because back to this stuck, back to this,
Yeah.
autopilot. The first thing that I'm going to have a conversation, like I said earlier, is around consciousness.
Yeah.
Because likely there's a lot of habits and patterns that are, kind of continuing your depressive symptoms that we can
Yeah.
create change around. So we're always going to have a conversation about consciousness, because like I said, that's the tool to create change. And then we're going to talk about how do we maintain change. And you'll hear me talk about a concept that I call a small daily promise, because I understand that especially with depression, when the energy is low, it is incredibly difficult to do new things. It's incredibly difficult because of that pull to the familiar for any of us to do new things. And why do I say this? Because I know as humans, it's completely understandable when we're uncomfortable, especially when we're experiencing the symptoms of depression and maybe we're hopeless and helpless and, just not feeling anything particularly that we want to feel at all. We want it to get better really, really quickly. And that's understandable. We want to feel better, right? And what I find is we can overwhelm ourselves trying to create change by trying to do too much at once. We could try to do 5 new things. And what's important is the sustainability of the habit. So we're going to talk about easing our way into new habits. So making what I call a small daily promise, keeping it small and creating the consistency in keeping that promise. And why do I say this in particular for depression? Not only am I sensitive to just creating and maintaining change in general, like I said, it's incredibly difficult for us to go into those unfamiliar territories, new behaviors, new thoughts. But with depression, the self-trust and just the overall feelings about the self become so negative that we want to start to harness creating a more positive feeling about the self. And the more we keep those promises, it doesn't happen overnight, but over time, we can begin to rebuild probably what for many of us was a lost trust in ourselves. We can start to see ourselves keeping promises that maybe we were unable to keep in the past, keeping them small enough to be possible to keep, right? And now we can, over time, begin to repair. Because I know a lot of us with, when we're having those depressive symptoms, our thoughts about ourselves are dark.
Terrible.
Dark. So part of the work we want to do is, and again, that doesn't shift and change overnight. I don't go from thinking I'm terrible and my life is hopeless to I'm positive and my life is great overnight, but we can begin to rebuild a positive feeling, like I said, through that promise keeping.
And I think that's key because people do want to, of course, in our society, we want a quick change. Give me the magic pill that I'm going to change overnight. But with conscious effort, consciousness is key every single day, a little bit of something, and it builds. We do find that people can change. Like we really can change. And I want to hear a little bit more about your story because you changed. Like what were the things that you did? If you can you share a little bit about your own personal story and then talk about like what did you do to get in this new place, this new space for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I described myself earlier as, I was anxiety was my life experience. My family was evidencing the same. We actually have a shared, or what for a while was a shared family mantra that was some version of always something, meaning there's always something to stress out about. And that was really emblematic of life.
Yeah.
So a lot of ways, right? I had my lane, or so I thought, defined for me. I had, the physical attributes that I was either gifted with or not, genetically, of course, and my body, how it looked. And by that point, I'd accumulated 3 decades of life in it. So I was pretty convinced, before I began my healing journey in my 30s, I was somewhat convinced that, okay, this is what your body, Nicole, is capable of. These are the things it's not.
And you were validated as a kid. Weren't you really great in sports and you were very intelligent, went to Cornell, like all of these things. So you're getting that validation, but that doesn't help, of course, which is what I love. I don't love that you had anxiety by any means, but this is what parents are doing today. are you great at soccer? Are you great at this sport? Are you great in school? And we're validating and pushing our kids so hard, but it's creating so much anxiety in these
Yes.
kids.
Yeah.
So that was that kind of your experience of being validated for these outer things versus the inner.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I understand that is that started again very early when, as we all do, we have emotional needs, we have spiritual needs. As far as I see them, they are to be
Yeah.
seen, heard, allowing the space to be authentically expressed, to just be who we are naturally. So back in time on my personal experience, having a really hyperactive and fight or flight mother who was emotionally disconnected as a
Yeah.
result, very much quote unquote unable to see, to hold that space for me. However, she was, for very understandable reasons, very kind of achievement driven, because like a lot of parents want you
Yeah.
to have the best in life,
Yep.
right? So, and I began very early on to see that I did well at school and I also did well at sports. So that became the way that I maintained good feelings about myself and my family.
Yeah.
I would bring them the report card. My mom would tell me I did great. I didn't even get some money. That's how she liked to, my mom loved to love through money. She would give me money. I could go buy something for myself, right? Same thing with
Ooh.
sports. My mom
Yeah.
was there. She was at, out in the field watching me pitch. This was, the most time I got to spend with my mom. So before you know it, I was all about school and softball, right? I came to realize there was a whole other part of myself that I was leaving out. I'm quite artistic. I like to do art. I like to have music and dance, right? I tried those things when I was a kid, but I wasn't as good as I was. So I didn't get the feedback that I got in these other areas. So I continued to perform in these other areas because that allowed me to maintain that connection with my family. And then I repeated it and I repeated it. And then before you know it, it's not really much of a surprise, I'm in a profession where I'm worrying about other people, where I'm showing up for other people, where I'm wearing the hat you need me to wear in that session, right? That's what therapists doing a lot. I'm being what you need. And when this is part of my dark night and kind of when I descended into it, it took until I entered my 30s until leakage started to happen. The anxiety that I was, somewhat managing was through the roof. I started to faint. I had all this weird cognitive stuff starting to happen.
Wow.
And I just started to feel like, what is this life? What am I doing? I have the practice. I have the relationship. I'm living in like a city and I know a lot of people, right? I'm checking all of these boxes and blah was the best word to describe it. Wow. I'm just kind of living for vacations. And I say all that to say that I realized that all of these imbalances in these areas physically, just the daily habits I was living were causing imbalances. I mean, Christ, I was living in an imbalanced nervous system like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Emotionally, I was quite imbalanced. Remember my two feelings?
Yeah.
Stress and kind of stress.
Yeah.
Where are the rest? It didn't mean I wasn't having other feelings throughout life. They were suppressed, as I call it. Spiritually, I was really only showing up as a part of myself, as the part that you needed in that moment. So after years of accumulating all of it, I did some digging, of course, first and foremost online to figure out what the hell was wrong with me. Because meanwhile, I was still operating on the old model, right? Okay, well, no big, terrible trauma happened to me, or did it? No, I don't think so. So that can't, I'm vegetarian. So I'm healthy. What could it, what's wrong? And I then realized we're missing, like you and I talked about in the beginning, a whole part of the story. So I did the work of healing. I realized how unconscious I was. I became conscious and I created a lot of new habits. And then what I discovered along the way is those lanes weren't applying anymore. My body was changing, like quite literally. Inflammation that I was carrying for decades started to just go away, quite naturally. So I was feeling better. The energy of my body, I actually had some, I wasn't listless. I would wake up with, not dragging myself fully out of bed. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. And so I started to see physically and experience myself physically differently. I also started to see space for more feelings as I began to heal my nervous system and go into more of a baseline, and being more present allowed other feelings in. I didn't know what to do with it at first, but I discovered anger and sadness and all the other things. And I felt overwhelmed and I didn't know how to deal with those. So then I did a lot, right? So now I thought my only feelings that this human has are stress and no stress. Now I came to realize, oh no, wait, I just like every other human have a range of emotions that this beautiful life can activate in me.
Yeah.
And now here, so right, so now that lane is expanding. And then spiritually, I'm discovering all of these other aspects of myself that I can now embody and cultivate and feel a bit more confidently expressing outward. So talk about change. I mean, if you would have spoken to me a decade ago, I would have probably argued and had a great case for why I had the lanes I had. And now, and this is why I'm so impassioned about the work that I do, because now not only have I widened my lanes or created new lanes for myself, right? I believe it's true because I lived it. And
You
that's
lived
the big motivator, Michelle, for my Instagram going on was once I began to see myself heal, to see this anxiety that I lived with go away. I mean, I know what agitation feels like now, so I'm not free of that. Like any other human, I can feel when I'm getting that agitation and when I'm starting to get my stress levels up. But by no means would I check the box of I'm a stuck, anxious person anymore.
Wow.
So I lived the change. And at that point, that's when I made the decision to initially go online, 2 Julys ago, to just begin to share this version of a journey, this version of options, of tools, because I knew that they likely weren't out there. I mean, these were all new to me, and I was in school for almost 10 years. So I don't know how much of the collective has this information. And I had no idea that it was going to be so resonating. I did and I didn't. And I think that the growth of the account so early on is just a testament to how stuck so many of us are feeling.
100%.
And then I meet people like you, and it's so beautiful to see other practitioners through their own healing journeys, own awarenesses, evolving their practices. And that's obviously where then the idea of the self-healer circle came to mind. Well, can we harness this in a virtual community now? Because I think it's so important.
So important. I agree. So you shared that you've done breath work. And wait, I just want to say you said so many beautiful things along your life journey, and thank you for sharing your own story. But it sounds like the baseline, you were so anxious even as a baby, like coming out of the womb, and everything just kept stockpiling on. So then you hit a breaking point. It sounds like around 30 years old or something like that. When you hit that dark night of the soul, or the time when you decided to transform, were you doing, I know you did a lot of journaling because I used to watch a journal, journaling, breath work, yoga, like were there any other things that you did that you really felt like contributed to your internal and external shift and transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. So not being, I think, a traditional journaler, like a lot of us resonate with, like journal my feelings, the kind of your diary. I didn't really do that growing up. However, I was really starting to come into the awareness of how we can use a daily practice like journaling to create intentional change. And I started to harness, the neuroplasticity, or the changeable neurons that fire together, wire together. And a really cool aspect of our mind is it doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. So I started to harness, how can I use a journaling practice to create change, to be like an active tool in creating consciousness to do something new, knowing that if I didn't do that, I could wake up and I probably would go back in to my old pattern. So the first thing I did was I developed what I call future self journaling, which is a daily practice really aimed at creating intentional change. So every morning when I would wake up, I would sit and I would follow these prompts that I created, that anyone who's interested can sign up for my email list and get sent right to their inbox. But I would do that daily. And every day in the beginning, it was really around, my work was around creating consciousness. So my journaling would look some version of, right, I am conscious. I'm aware of, the present moment. I can connect with my senses. Just practically what I intended to do during that day. And then I would close my journal. And the fact that I drew it to mind in the morning set me up to maybe keep that promise that I was talking about later. And for me, it started with one moment in that day. I would set an alarm on my phone. And when it went off, I would do a consciousness check-in. Where were you? Oh, typical, you're in your mind. You're always in your mind, Nicole. You're not here, right? And then I would work to bring myself present. And then I did that. So Journaling I used throughout, because you can create a new habit in any direction through that
Yeah,
tool.
for
So
sure.
first I created consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and then I created breath work. I created a daily practice of that, like I was saying, breath work. I learned how to utilize my breath to regulate my body.
Mm,
And then I looked at my nutrition. I looked at what I was eating, and I
yeah.
began to reconnect with my body when I was eating, to relearn my body's signals, to learn when it's hungry. I have a lot of narratives around food that impact it, passed on again from things I heard, eating behaviors I saw, that didn't serve me. So
Mm-hmm.
I reevaluated my relationship with my body and how I learned how disconnected I was. So I realized I have to learn how to connect with my body, because I believe our bodies carry the wisdom of when we're hungry, when we're full. I also
Totally.
believe that our bodies tell us what it likes to eat and what it doesn't, and that that's different depending on who you are. So
Mm-hmm.
then I began a practice of connecting and learning my signals, learning when I was hungry, learning when to stop eating, and finding the foods that allowed me to feel energetic and great. And sometimes really devastatingly, coming to the awareness that some foods that I like to eat don't make me feel great
Yeah.
afterward. So then I began to employ consciousness around the choices. Don't just go into autopilot when you're making food or ordering food. Really ask yourself, what do you want? When are you full? Does this make you feel good? So I
Mm-hmm.
got clear on my nutrition. I got honest about my sleep habits, right? So I went kind of just through a physical body checklist. Okay, your body needs to eat, your body needs to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
What do my sleep habits look like? You and I were joking about our
Yeah.
Aura rings before. Not great was the answer. I was up way later than I liked. I woke
Yeah.
up exhausted. I woke up, I barely felt like I slept. So
Yeah.
then I decided I need more hours in bed. I
Yeah.
decided that I would like to have a morning routine, even though I really disliked mornings for me with my work, right? So now I began to shift my sleeping habits. So gradually, I worked essentially from the body up. I
Yeah.
made sure that my body was, and this took several months, so upwards of a year, before my body finally started to be in that baseline, to feel not just stuck, right, in that fight or flight. And then I was able to dive into the deeper work that you and I were talking about earlier, right? The inner child work, the mind stuff, the
Yeah.
wounds, all of the patterns that I had in relationships. For me, I had to learn what boundaries are and learn how to employ them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I say in that order because I do believe the body plays such a role that if we're still in that dysregulated body, that's really going to make it difficult to change some of our daily habits and patterns.
I agree. And I love that. It's really about going inside, isn't it? And really reconnecting to self. And I think in our society, again, we're so used to going outside of self. Like, what can you do for me? And what can this pill do for me? And can this bottle of wine help me in this pot? Whatever it is, we're out here when what I'm hearing you say is you just tuned in. You went on an inward journey of self,
Mm-hmm.
got to know everything about what you need because only you know.
Yes.
Only
Yes.
you know. What a beautiful journey. And I like hearing you say it because I'm sure people are listening going, how long is this going to take me?
Yeah.
Is it a 10-year journey? Or, we always want, the ego wants to know that. Well, how
Yes.
long? Can you tell me, like in 4 weeks and 2 days, will I be done and I'll be free of anxiety? But it's different for everyone. But in general, would you agree? Like when we really do our own practice and reconnect to self, we do see changes pretty quickly. Would you agree?
Yeah. I changes I think come in different ways, and
Yeah.
they're ever present. We have to look. We have to learn
Yes.
to look and let it in.
Yes.
And I still do that. There's still moments now where I'll be living an experience and I still have the memory of that old reaction that this experience would have elicited from me. And when it
Yeah.
doesn't happen, I make a one of the lines in my future self journal every day is I'm proud of who I'm becoming, and I take a moment to truly notice myself,
Oh, I
because a lot of
love
us don't
that.
notice ourselves. So it's two part.
No.
It's because I could tell you as long as the day, right? That the changes are there, Michelle. You will only believe them unless they impact you, when they impact your
Mhm.
experience. So you have to then, most of us, be conscious about that. Because what a lot of us do, we diminish ourselves. We
We
do the
do.
complete opposite. We actually say, oh, I'm not that different yet. I'm not, this isn't working really. So we're missing it. So the change
Yeah.
there, don't take my, like you're saying, I'm not a believer in outsourcing anything. That's why I
Mhm.
don't think universalized plans work, because there isn't one universal way
I agree.
to heal. I think ultimate empowerment is going within, understanding our ever-changing nature, because we don't know, back to what we were talking about earlier, right? That uncertainty tomorrow. Shit, when I turn this down and you and I are done with this conversation, I don't know what I'm walking back out into in terms of life, right? So a lot of us want the things around us to change. In particular, we want the people around us to change. If only you, then I would feel different. My goal is to empower within so that we can cope with the ever-changing without.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Love that. So true. Tell me a little bit about, how do you change a program
Yeah. So
in 5 minutes or less?
yeah. Well, it's through everything we talked about. So actually
Yeah,
minutes or
all of
5
it.
minutes or less.
Yeah.
Being conscious, creating the new program, which might start with a new thought, a new feeling that leads to a new feeling that elicits a new behavior. You have to start to wire, and then fire and then wire, right? A new pathway consistently over time, and then you repeat it, right?
Yeah.
So now my whole way of being, there are a lot of things that are my new program. I now get up at a very early hour. You and I were joking, this is an early call, right? Like, quite naturally, I wake up. 10 years ago, I would have never seen this hour of the morning. I would have never won it, right? So I've already installed, because I did it repetitively enough, I installed a new behavioral program. So some are able to kind of go right back into that, kind of right into the autopilot, and others we have to just continue to be more conscious. So the answer to the question of when does it end is, we have to still live in consciousness, because if we don't, right, we can then develop and form a new pattern that doesn't help us.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. The last question. You kind of answered this question. Interdependence. You talk about that, but that's kind of what you've been saying already.
Yeah.
It's really just
Interdependence is, how do we relate? How do we hold space? How do we learn how to be in relationship with a separate, different, unique human? And I believe, we are all evolutionarily wired for a relationship. We quite need them, not only for physical, back in time, not only do we need them for physical survival, we need them for emotional. They have a lot of positive effects, relationships, that is. And I think a lot of times my work is misunderstood, because I do focus on the individual. A lot of the kickback I get immediately is, what about collectivist cultures? What about relationships? No man is an island. And that's not what my work means at all. It's, how do we learn how to bring our uniqueness into relationship? I actually quite know that we need relationships. I also quite know that a lot of us defer our needs out still, right? And we don't know how to be us in a relationship. And what happens then is we get quite resentful at the relationships around us, at the people around us, because again, when they don't change and we continue to suffer as a result of it, and or when you're like me, I can only show up and be what you need for so long before I start to dislike you on some level.
Yeah.
But really, I have to understand the role I was playing, which was, well, Nicole, how many moments did you not tell this person that didn't work out for you? Or how many moments did you want to show up differently and you decided not to? So what interdependence is to me is, right back in time, that ideal parent-child relationship where we have that space to be seen, heard, and uniquely us, even when our opinions, thoughts, and feelings differ. That's what interdependence is. And then we really, we feel fulfilled in the relationship, as opposed to drained and resentful like most of us do.
This question comes up for me a lot with people when they ask me, well, isn't, like, when I focus too much on myself, isn't it selfish? I'm like, no, it's not selfish. I know I said that was the last question. Just comment on this if you don't mind. Talk about that just a little bit. Focusing on self is not selfish.
No, I think
Please talk about that.
Selfish has gotten really bad, quite universally. I think a lot of us have some version of that messaging, to do for oneself. We'll either get told it's directly selfish, or it'll get indicated, that it is. And I'm going to say probably what could sound like a cliche thing right now, though, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And if we're not meeting our own needs, we don't have the resources to show up and hold space for someone else, or to help support them in any way. So we actually do ourselves a disservice if we don't put ourselves in the equation. And like I said, we can cause quite a lot of damage. Though I think a lot of us get that level of messaging. Some of it's cultural, some of it's religious, some of it's societal, some of it's just our immediate family unit. Coming from a very codependent, boundaryless household, I got that message a lot.
Yeah.
And when I put up boundaries, I actually took space from my family for almost a 2-year period. I went no contact, given a lot of the dynamics and things that were going on. And I was directly told that when I, started to put boundaries up, I was directly, informed by my family that I was indeed being selfish. And whether or not that's hurtful, that's painful. I mean, I'm of the belief that I can't change their belief. If my parents believe that to be, that's they have every right to believe that I'm selfish. So for me, a lot of my healing was unlearning that definition of selfish, and really learning a new one, which is that it's not selfish at all, and that I can't quite show up for other people at all if I don't put myself into the equation.
I can't show up for other people at all if I don't put myself in the equation. I love that. I think about when even talking about like self-love, people go, oh, you can't love you shouldn't love yourself. It's like, what? But we're supposed to love other. And you took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking of codependency. So many of us that are codependent have a hard time putting self first.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, not to complicate things further though, oftentimes the role we're playing for someone else is self-serving. We are actually, right? Even the helper role, we're getting something from it.
Oh,
feel good. So even though it looks selfless because you're exhausting me, I'm endlessly here for you, Karen, or whatever your name is over here, right? I feel like I'm being selfless in doing this, but I can make an argument that role, just like that role for me, was actually, it's meeting a need.
It's filling up a false identity.
Right. So, I mean, if we really want to complicate it, we're all always acting in our own service at all times. We're calling it different things.
So true. So true. So true. Oh my gosh, Nicole, thank you. This was so awesome. I'm so grateful to have you on. And please let us know, how can people find you and find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to find me is where I'm hanging out each and every day on Instagram at the.holistic.psychologist. I shout out that because from there, I put up a nice handy dandy link tree. So anyone who's listening that is interested in the Future Self Journal, you can follow a link and get dropped right on my email list, and signing up will get that right to your inbox. I'm also talking about the next enrollment cycle for the self-healers. So anyone who's interested in that virtual membership, we're looking at a November/December 1st launch date. Pretty much any and all information comes through that Instagram, including links to a YouTube channel I have, The Holistic Psychologist, and all other fun projects. So come see me on Instagram, those of you who have it, and get some goodies and meet all the other self-healers out there that are having these conversations and doing this work.
Absolutely. You have a great Instagram account. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today with us. We really appreciate it. And I know the people on the adult chair that listen are going to be so happy today, like, yay, she's finally on. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you for this opportunity to have a chat with you and connect with your community.
So great to finally meet you. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the show. I know I sure did. And for those of you that want more information on the Adult Chair, we have upcoming workshops. We've got the membership. We've got all kinds of good things. I've got all kinds of free goodies on the website at theadultchair.com. And that's all I've got for you for today. So I will see you next week, seated right here in the Adult Chair.